I'm Marlene Wexler. I turned 68 last March, and for the first time in my life, I couldn't button my blouse. The teacup slipped right through my fingers and shattered on the tile. I stared at the pieces on the floor, not moving, not even breathing for a moment. That was the morning I realized my hands no longer listened to me. The swelling had crept in slowly over the years, but that morning it roared. I reached for my coat with stiff arms and stepped out into the gray Virginia rain, unaware that by nightfall, my son would already be holding my last $15,000 before I go any further. Let me know where you're listening from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to ask someone you loved for help and ended up regretting it. I grew up in a small town outside Norfolk Quiet Place with good neighbors, the kind who'd bring over soup when someone was sick. My parents worked hard and taught me to do the same. When I married Joe, we built our life in a little 2-bedroom house. He fixed cars for a living, and I worked at the post office until my knees gave out after he passed. I stayed in that same house. It wasn't fancy, but everything in it had meaning, even the creaky floorboards in the hallway. My son Adam lives just 20 minutes away in Fairfax. He's got a family of his own, a mortgage, 2 teenagers, a busy life. I never expected much, just hoped we'd see each other. Now and then, maybe have dinner once a month. Arthritis set in 5 years ago, right after I turned 63. It started slow, a little stiffness in the mornings, but lately, it had become something else entirely. I couldn't hold a fork without shaking. Some nights, I couldn't even sleep through the pain. That morning, I took the bus to Riverside Medical to see Dr. Radley. She's a rheumatologist, small woman, silver hair, always looks me in the eye when she talks, Marlene, she said, after examining my hands. We need to act fast, or you'll lose more than comfort. You'll lose function. She showed me a brochure for a new treatment, biological injections that could slow the disease. The pictures showed smiling seniors playing catch with grandkids, trimming rose bushes, baking bread. I nodded along until she got to the cost, $20,000. I didn't say anything for a full minute, just held the brochure and stared at the page. My insurance would only cover a sliver of it. I had about $15,000 in savings money. I'd scraped together over the years, from birthday checks, from Joe's old pension, from grocery coupons, and skipped vacations. I was $5,000 short. I sat at my kitchen table that night and stared at the peeling corner of the brochure. I thought about selling something, but I didn't own much that would help. Not the car, not the furniture, not the house at my age. Moving wasn't a real option. There was only one other possibility. Adam had a good job. At an insurance firm, he wore suits. Now took client calls on weekends, owned a house with a finished basement and granite countertops. He'd always been responsible, always quick with numbers. He and his wife Lauren kept a full calendar. But surely they'd understand. I called their house. Lauren answered in her usual cheerful voice, said Adam would be home after dinner. I told her I'd come by that evening. Is everything all right? She asked. I said yes, but that wasn't true. Not really. When I got to their house, the kids were upstairs, music playing from one room, video game, noises from the other. Lauren was at the stove, cooking something with garlic and lemon. Adam finally came in around 7, loosened his tie, and reached for a beer. He looked tired, but smiled when he saw me. We sat in the den. I explained everything slowly, carefully. I told him about the pain, the treatment, the chance to hold a paintbrush again, or pick up a pie dish without wincing. I told him about the cost and how I was $5,000 short. He didn't hesitate. He opened his laptop, searched for grant programs, printed a few things out, then leaned back and said, You know, Mom, it'd be easier to manage the payments if we set up a joint account just for the treatment. I can monitor it, add the $5,000, and pay the clinic directly that way. You won't have to worry about anything. I hesitated, but nodded. Adam had always been reliable, and it wasn't like I was giving up control. He was just helping organize it better. We went to the bank the next morning. The teller smiled and walked us through the paperwork. I transferred every penny of my savings into the new account, in Adam's name, and he promised to handle the rest. 2 days later, I called the clinic to schedule my first appointment. The receptionist said they just needed confirmation of payment. I thanked her and called Adam. No answer. I texted him. No reply. That evening, I tried again. Voicemail. By the next day, I was worried. I opened Facebook, something I rarely do, and there were bright photos from Lauren's account. Adam in a beach chair, drink in hand. The caption read, "Paradise at last, worth every penny." I stared at that photo for a long time. When I finally reached Adam, the sound on the other end of the line told me everything I needed to know. Laughter waves, some upbeat music playing in the background. "Hey, Mom," he said, as if I'd called to chat. I asked him if they were on vacation. He didn't hesitate. "Yeah, we've been planning it a while," he said. Like that explained anything. I told him the clinic needed confirmation of payment. He paused, like he was annoyed I'd brought it up. "We'll talk when I get back," he said. "Now's not the best time." I asked when they'd return. He said 10 days. I said the doctor warned that waiting could mean permanent damage. Adam exhaled, like I was bothering him. "Mom, it's just arthritis. You've lived with it for years. You'll be fine for a couple more weeks." I didn't say anything at first. My hand shook holding the phone. Then I asked him if he'd used the money. He didn't deny it. "Yes," he said. "We needed this. Cordelia and I work hard. The kids are growing up fast. We can't even afford a decent break." I asked again. "You used all of it." Another pause. "Look, Mom, stop making a big deal. It's not like you're dying. Your joints hurt. That's not an emergency." He didn't yell. He didn't cuss. But somehow his calmness made it worse. He'd taken every cent I had and used it for jet skis and poolside drinks, then acted like I was being unreasonable for caring. I tried to remind him what the doctor said. He interrupted. "Doctors say that stuff to scare people. You always fall for it. You've lived 68 years without some fancy drug. You'll survive a bit longer." I don't know how the call ended. I just remember hearing the empty silence after. I sat at the table a long time after that, holding the phone in my lap. I kept thinking about all the times I'd helped him, the down payment on his house, watching the kids when he and Cordelia had meetings or wanted a weekend away. Birthday checks, school supplies, groceries during lean years. I never once kept score. I didn't open the curtains the next day, or the day after that. The pain in my hands was still there, but I didn't notice it the way I usually did. The other pain, the one in my chest, drowned everything else out. On the 4th day, I heard knocking. I stayed in bed. It didn't stop. When I finally opened the door, Enid pushed right past me, holding 2 grocery bags, and her raincoat still dripping from the storm. "My goodness, Marlene," she said, "you look like a ghost." She put bread, cheese, and apples on the counter and set the kettle on. She didn't ask if I wanted tea, she just made it. That was Enid. We'd been friends since high school. She knew when I needed someone to talk and when I just needed someone to fill the silence. I told her everything while she stirred sugar into my tea. About the diagnosis, the treatment, the savings. About Adam's vacation and what he said. She didn't interrupt except to reach for my hand now and then. When I finally finished, she didn't get dramatic or loud. She just sat quietly for a while, then said, "You know, I never told you this, but I always thought Adam was a bit spoiled. I wanted to argue, but I couldn't." She brought up the time he begged for that guitar when he was 14. I'd been saving for a new washing machine ours had broken, and I was doing everything by hand, but he'd talked so sweetly about wanting to be a musician. I gave in, bought the guitar, and washed clothes in the sink for months. He barely touched the thing. Or the Europe trip when he was 18, I gave him the money I'd set aside for roof repairs so he could go with his friends. That winter, I used buckets for the leaks and blankets to stay warm. Enid looked me straight in the eye. He's never appreciated your sacrifices. He's always expected them. I didn't argue. The words stung, but they felt true. I just never wanted to believe them before. Later that evening, Orville came over. Enid must have called him. He sat at the table next to me, arms folded, listening carefully as I retold the story. When I was done, he said only one thing: that boy's a coward and a thief. I asked what I was supposed to do now. Orville suggested court. It's fraud, he said. You gave him the money for your treatment, not a vacation. But I shook my head. I didn't want to go through lawyers or courtrooms. Besides, I'd signed everything willingly. I'd just been naive. Enid looked thoughtful. What about your will? She asked. Is Adam still the only beneficiary? I nodded. After Joe passed, I had written up a simple will. The house, the money, anything left would go to Adam. Who else would I leave it to? Enid leaned forward. Maybe it's time to reconsider. Maybe this is your chance to set things right, not out of revenge, but for your own peace of mind. Orville agreed. Think about the grandkids. Zoe and Jesse didn't do anything wrong. But if Adam gets everything, what kind of future will they have? I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking of birthdays, school plays, scraped knees, Christmas mornings. I thought of the sweet boy Adam used to be. I searched for the moment he changed and couldn't find it. Maybe he hadn't changed. Maybe I just refused to see him clearly. The next morning, I found the business card Talbot Cranston had given me years ago when I had a question about the house deed. His office was still in the same place downtown, third floor of an old brick building that smelled faintly of dust and lemon polish. He remembered me, offered me tea, asked how he could help. I want to change my will, I told him. He didn't flinch. He just opened a folder and said, Let's talk about what you'd like to change. By the time we finished, the decision was made. My house would stay with me until I passed. After that, it would be sold. 30% would go to a non-profit for seniors with arthritis. The rest, along with any savings I had left, would go into an education trust for Zoe and Jesse. They wouldn't be able to touch the money until college and only fully access it at 25. Adam would get nothing. Talbot asked if I was sure. There's still time to revise this if you change your mind, he said. I told him I wasn't changing anything. He already made his choice, I said. When I stepped outside, it was still raining. The same gray drizzle that had soaked the sidewalks for days. But something about the air felt different, like the storm was starting to break. The night after I signed the new will, I sat at the kitchen table with a velvet-lined box in front of me. Inside were pieces my mother had given me over the years: a gold necklace with a small emerald, 2 rings with worn edges, a silver bracelet that used to catch the light just right when she waved. They weren't extravagant, but they had weight. They'd been hers, and she'd wanted me to pass them on to Zoe one day. I closed the box, stood up, and placed it carefully into my purse. Downtown, there's a pawn shop just past the old movie theater. I walked there after lunch past shuttered storefronts and kids skateboarding in the parking lot of what used to be the library. The man behind the counter was polite. He opened the box, looked over each piece, and offered a number that made my chest tighten. But it was enough to begin. When I told Dr. Radley I could start treatment, she smiled and reached for her clipboard. That's the right decision, Marlene, she said. If we get ahead of it now, we have a good chance of keeping your hands stable. She scheduled the first injection for the following Tuesday. It was raining again when I stepped outside, but the air smelled cleaner than it had all week. The same day I began treatment, Adam and his family returned from their trip. Orville spotted them first. He knocked on my door that evening holding a bag of oranges from his yard. Saw your boy dragging suitcases out of a taxi this morning, he said. Looked like he hadn't missed a minute of sleep. I asked if Adam said anything. Not a word. Tipped the driver and went inside. I waited. A day passed, then another, then 3. Nothing. The phone didn't ring, no knock at the door, no message from Lauren. On the 4th day, just after lunch, there was a knock. I opened the door and saw Lauren standing on the porch, holding a brown paper bag in both hands. She looked like she hadn't slept much. "Hi, Marlene," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Can I come in for a minute?" I stepped aside. We sat in the kitchen while the kettle heated. She pushed the bag toward me. "It's tea. From the Bahamas. They said it helps with joint pain." I looked at the bag, then back at her. "Tea," I said quietly. She nodded. "I didn't know, Marlene. I swear. I didn't know he used your money. He told me he got a bonus from work and that you'd helped out with some travel expenses. I had no idea it was everything. I didn't say anything, just listened." Her voice was low-tired. She looked at the floor, then out the window, then back at me. Zoe overheard something she said. From the neighbor. Orville must have mentioned it to Mrs. Patterson. She came home crying, said it didn't make sense and she wanted to know the truth. I asked Adam, and I could tell right away she was right. I poured the tea. Neither of us touched it. "I told him he had to pay you back," she said. "He took out a loan. He's supposed to start making monthly payments. I don't know how long it'll take, but we'll get it to you." I nodded, but didn't reach for the cup. "I've already started treatment," I said. "I used the jewelry." Her hands curled in her lap. "The ones you were saving for Zoe?" "Yes." Lauren blinked quickly. "I'm so sorry." She stood then and hugged me. I didn't pull away, but I didn't hug her back. She left soon after. The house was quiet again. I went to my appointments. I did what the doctor told me. The pain didn't vanish, but the swelling was better, and I could hold things again: a cup, a fork, a pair of scissors. The phone stayed quiet, but I started seeing bits of news in town. At the pharmacy, the clerk smiled softly when she handed me my prescription. At the grocery store, the cashier asked how I was feeling. The mailman, who usually kept to himself, asked if I needed help bringing in the packages. A few days later, the phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but something in me said to pick it up. "Hi, Mrs. Wexler," the voice said. "It's Linda Sanderson. My husband works with Adam." I remembered her polished, pleasant, always in heels, at company picnics. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry," she said. "Howard told me what happened. We both think it's awful. If there's anything you need, anything at all, we'd be happy to help." I thanked her, but something she said stuck. "Howard mentioned you changed your will," she added. "Said it was smart." I asked how Howard knew. "Oh," she said, pausing. "Jonathan Baker told him. I think he works at the records office. His mother's friends with my aunt, and they were playing bridge." I hung up as politely as I could. That night, I stood in the hallway looking at the front door. Locked. The porch light was off, but I knew it wouldn't stay quiet for long. It didn't. Saturday morning, I heard tires screech across the lawn. I peeked out the window. Adam's car. He stormed up the steps and flung the door open before I could even reach the knob. "Mom," he called. "Where are you?" I walked into the foyer. "Did you cut me out of the will?" His voice was sharp, wild. "Yes," I said. "I did." His face twisted. "After everything I've done for you, after all the help I've given," I raised a hand. "What help? You took my savings. You left me without care. You said my treatment didn't matter." "I was stressed," he snapped. "I made a mistake. But this is punishment." I looked at him. "You spent the money. You made the choice." He threw a vase against the wall. It had belonged to Joe, the one from our 10th anniversary. It shattered. I stepped back. "Get out," I said. "Mom, you broke what your father gave me. You took what I had left. You don't get to stand here and yell." He paused. Then his voice softened, fake gentle. "We can fix this. Just change the will back." "No." He stared. "You'll regret this." "You already made sure I had regrets," I said. "The rest is mine to carry." He left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. The silence that followed was long, still, but steady. 3 days after Adam shattered the vase and stormed out, the phone rang again. I almost let it go, but something made me answer. Grandma Zoe's voice was small. Not her usual bright, chatty tone, the one she used when telling me about swim meets or science fairs. "Can I come over?" she asked. "Just for a little while," I told her, of course. 15 minutes later, I watched from the porch as she walked up the path, arms crossed tight over her chest, hoodie sleeves pulled over her hands even though it was warm out. She didn't smile when I opened the door. Just walked in and dropped her bag by the hall table like she'd done 100 times before. I offered her a sandwich. She shook her head. I made us tea instead. We sat at the kitchen table, her eyes on the steam rising from the cup mine on her face. I waited. Then she asked it. "Do you hate my dad?" I blinked. "No," I said quietly. She nodded, but her mouth stayed tight. "He says you're trying to turn everyone against him. That you're being unfair. That we're supposed to be family." I didn't respond right away. She looked at me, really looked, and said, "But he lied, didn't he?" I nodded. "He did." She picked at the seam of her hoodie. "He told Mom you gave him permission. That it wasn't even that much money. That you were just being dramatic." I reached for her hand. "Zoe." I gave him everything I had saved for treatment. He used it for a vacation. And then he told me it wasn't important. She nodded, slowly. I thought so. She stayed for an hour. We didn't talk much after that. I showed her a few old photos her dad when he was her age, standing beside a rusty bike with a fishing rod and a crooked grin. She asked if she could keep it. I told her yes. Before she left, she stopped at the door and turned to face me. "Grandma," she said, "when I grow up, I don't want to be like him." She came back 2 days later, this time with Jesse in tow. He carried a box of coloring pencils and a stack of half-finished drawings. I made them sandwiches. We played dominoes. Jesse asked if I'd ever tried lemon cake with whipped cream. I hadn't, so the next time they visited, Zoe brought a small cake she'd baked herself, whipped cream in a plastic tub, and 2 paper crowns she'd made from construction paper. "We missed your birthday," she said. "So we're doing it now." I couldn't remember the last time someone had made me a birthday cake. They came every Saturday after that. Sometimes they stayed for lunch, sometimes just an hour. They'd help me trim the Roses stack library books, rearrange the pantry. Lauren would drop them off and pick them up, always giving me a quiet wave from the driver's seat, sometimes mouthing, "Thank you." One evening after the kids left, I found a folded note tucked beneath the sugar tin. In Zoe's handwriting, "It's okay if you don't forgive him. I still love you." It was the first time in weeks I let myself cry. 2 days later, Orville knocked again. "Got mail for you," he said, holding up an envelope. It had no return address. Inside was a typed letter, unsigned. It read, "You've caused a lot of trouble. People are talking. Your son has a reputation to maintain. This isn't helping anyone. No signature, just that." I folded it and placed it in the kitchen drawer. Didn't say a word. The next week, a man from a local veterans group came by. He'd heard I was giving part of my estate to charity, asked if I'd be open to speaking at a luncheon about elder fraud. I said I'd think about it. The same day, I received a second envelope. This one had a printed return address, Bright Horizons Legal Associates. Inside was a formal notice. Adam had retained counsel. He was exploring legal options regarding the change in my estate. I brought the letter to Talbot's office that afternoon. He read it twice, then folded his glasses and looked at me. "They don't have a case," he said. "Your mental capacity is clear. The document is valid. But he's going to make noise." I nodded. "Let him." Talbot leaned back in his chair. "This might stir up more than noise, Marlene." "I know." He tapped the desk. "Then let's be ready." A week later, I received a message from the clinic. They were inviting donors to a recognition breakfast. They wanted me to come and meet some of the other seniors I'd be helping. I wasn't sure at first, but I said yes. That morning, I wore the navy dress I'd kept for church and tucked a pin of Joe's into the collar. When I walked into the room, I saw 24 faces. Older men and women, most with walkers or canes, all of them smiling, holding plates of fruit and muffins. One woman reached for my hand. "You did this," she asked. "You gave us hope I didn't know what to say." Afterward, as I left the building, I noticed a familiar car parked across the street. Adam sat behind the wheel watching. He didn't wave. Neither did I. The next day, a reporter called from the local paper. She wanted to interview me about elder financial abuse, said she'd heard about the trust I'd set up. I asked who told her. She said the story had made its way through town council. Someone had mentioned my name during a committee meeting. I told her I'd need to think about it. After I hung up, I looked out the window. The same sidewalk, the same hedges. But something had shifted. The story was no longer just mine. The morning of the luncheon, I parked behind the senior center and sat in the car for a moment with the engine off. I could hear birds nesting somewhere above the roofline, maybe in the vent near the chimney. The flyer said the meeting would start at 10 sharp. Inside, folding chairs had been arranged in rows, a long table at the front, holding a pitcher of water and a row of paper cups. A woman with a clipboard handed me a name tag. I pinned it to my sweater and took a seat in the second row. People filtered in slowly, men with suspenders, women with purses that clinked with mints and keys. A few younger faces hovering at the edges of the room, maybe family members or staff. A microphone crackled once, then settled. The moderator introduced herself as Sharon. She explained that this was the first of what they hoped would be a monthly gathering to raise awareness around elder abuse, especially financial coercion and exploitation. She thanked the local council for helping organize the space, then read out a few anonymous stories that had been submitted by seniors in the area. I listened, hands folded in my lap, as she told one about a woman who had her checks rerouted by her son, another whose niece opened credit cards in her name. No names were shared, just the facts. And then Sharon looked up and said, "We're honored to have someone here today who's agreed to speak about her experience. Please welcome Mrs. Marlene Wexler." There was a light smattering of applause. I stood, walked to the front, and held onto the lectern to steady myself. I didn't plan to speak today. I began, and that was true. I had agreed in theory, but I hadn't written anything down. But something changed when I started reading the stories. They sounded a lot like mine. I told them how I'd worked as a school secretary for nearly 30 years. How I'd tucked away savings slowly, not much, but enough to feel steady. How the diagnosis came and how I hesitated before telling anyone. And then how Adam, my only son, had offered to help. I didn't say much more than that, just enough to let the silence fill in the rest. When I sat down, no one clapped, but people nodded. A few wiped their eyes. One woman reached across the aisle and took my hand. Later, Sharon thanked me quietly and handed me a pamphlet from the local advocacy group. "We're hosting a series of radio interviews next month," she said. "If you're willing, I think your voice could help a lot of people. I nodded. Let me think on it. That weekend, Zoe came over with 2 old shoeboxes from her closet. She was working on a school project about community service and wanted to put together care packages for seniors in the clinic. We're making little kits, she said, like socks, snacks, crossword books. You could help me find out what people need. We worked on it all afternoon. Jessie colored the labels. Zoe wrote a note for each bag. You matter. You are seen. I dropped them off at the clinic 2 days later. The receptionist cried when she read the cards. The following week, a woman from the town council called. She asked if I would consider serving as a community advisor for a new elder protection task force. It's just a quarterly role, she explained. We need someone with a voice folks trust. I agreed. When I told Lauren, she nodded slowly. You know, she said, I think Zoe's watching you more closely than you realize. It wasn't long after that the first article came out. Front page of the local section. The headline didn't name me, it simply read, Local woman speaks out after financial abuse by family member. There was a photo, though. From the luncheon. Me standing at the lectern, glasses halfway down my nose, hand on the edge of the podium. The article quoted part of my talk. A single sentence. He said it wasn't that much money, but it was everything I had. I clipped it out and put it in the drawer where Joe's cufflinks used to be. The letters started arriving that same week. One from a woman in Pennsylvania whose son had emptied her retirement account. Another from a man in Indiana who said his grandson had pawned his war medals. Thank you for making us visible, he wrote. At the grocery store, someone stopped me near the potatoes. You're brave, she said. I wish I'd said something years ago. I still hadn't heard a word from Adam, but I knew from Orville that he and Lauren were still living in the house. The car hadn't moved in days. Then one Thursday morning, as I was watering the front ferns, Zoe came running up the walk, backpack slung over one shoulder. Grandma, she said, can I stay here this weekend? I nodded. She glanced back toward the road. Dad's mad again. Said you're making him look bad in front of the neighbors. She stayed 2 nights. We made lasagna, watched an old movie with Jimmy Stewart. She sat close to me on the couch, her head resting against my arm like she used to when she was little. And on Sunday, as Lauren came to pick her up, Zoe turned to me at the door and said, You know, when I grow up, I want to be like you. The courthouse wasn't far from the library, just a brick building with narrow windows and faded flags out front. I arrived 10 minutes early and sat in the hallway watching people file past. A man with his tie askew. A woman carrying a manila folder pressed to her chest. Everyone seemed to be waiting for something. Talbot met me near the elevators. He wore the same gray suit he always did, his hair combed flat and his glasses tucked into the collar of his shirt. It's a hearing, he reminded me quietly. Not a trial, just a petition hearing. We stepped inside the courtroom. A judge in a navy robe sat at the front flipping through papers. Adam was already there sitting with his lawyer, some man with a square jaw and expensive-looking watch. He didn't look at me when I entered. The judge called the matter forward. Adam's lawyer began saying my recent changes to the trust were suspicious, citing my age, public profile, and what he called emotional instability due to recent medical treatment. Talbot stayed calm, steady. When it was his turn, he handed over doctor's reports, the psych evaluation from my oncologist, and copies of all the estate paperwork signed and notarized months before. The judge glanced through it all, then looked up. Mrs. Wexler, do you understand the changes you made to your estate? Yes, I said, standing. Did anyone pressure you to make those decisions? No. He nodded. Then unless counsel has further evidence, this matter is closed. Adam didn't stand. He stared straight ahead. When the judge moved to the next case, I stepped out into the hall where the air smelled faintly of copier ink and lemon polish. Talbot caught up with me by the door. It's done, he said. They can try again, but there's no case. I nodded. 2 days later, a reporter from the regional paper called again. This time, She asked if I'd be willing to tell my story on record, name included. "You've become a symbol," she said. "People are starting to talk about inheritance coercion. No one ever used that phrase before you." We scheduled the interview for the following week. In the meantime, Zoe came by with a form she needed help filling out an essay prompt for a scholarship application. "It's about resilience," she said, chewing the end of her pen. "Can I write about you?" I told her that was up to her. She wrote it sitting at my kitchen table, legs tucked under her typing, slow and careful on the laptop her school had issued. I didn't read it until she was done. She passed me the printed copy just before dinner. At the top, the title read, "Grace Under Fire, What My Grandmother Taught Me." It was 4 paragraphs long. The final line read, "When I think about the kind of adult I want to be, I think about the day my grandmother stood in front of a room of strangers and told the truth." I folded the paper and placed it inside the family Bible, right where Joe had left his favorite bookmark. The article ran the next Sunday. This time, my name was in the headline, "Marlene Wexler Speaks Out on Financial Exploitation, a Family Story." There was a photograph from the day of the luncheon. This time, closer in, you could see the texture of my sweater, the way my hand held the microphone. The piece mentioned the trust I'd created, the Veterans Clinic, the speaking events. It mentioned that a legal challenge had been dismissed. There was no mention of Adam by name, but in a town our size, everyone knew. By Monday morning, 3 different people had left notes in my mailbox. One simply said, "Thank you." Another had a check enclosed for the clinic fund. The third was handwritten in shaky cursive. "I haven't told my children yet, but I will." Lauren called me that afternoon. Her voice was tight, careful. "He's furious," she said quietly. "Says you've ruined his reputation. He's blaming the neighbors, the paper me." I listened. "He packed a bag," she continued. "Left before dinner. Zoe's in her room. Do you need anything?" I asked. There was a pause. "Would it be all right if we stayed with you for a few days?" I made up the guest room that evening, put fresh sheets on the bed, laid out towels, cleared the small dresser. When they arrived, Zoe hugged me without a word. Lauren looked exhausted. Jessie clutched a blanket and a bag of goldfish crackers. We made spaghetti for dinner, sat around the table, talked about small things. Jessie told me about a turtle he saw at the park. Zoe asked if we could bake something later in the week. After the dishes were done and everyone had gone to bed, I stepped onto the porch. The house was quiet behind me. A few stars peeked through the trees. Somewhere down the block, a wind chime moved softly in the breeze. And in that stillness, for the first time in months, I felt something return. The next few days moved slowly like the light in late October, soft around the edges but fading early. Lauren and the kids settled into the house without fuss. Zoe helped me fold laundry. Jessie made little tents out of the sofa cushions. At night, I'd hear quiet footsteps in the hallway or the low murmur of bedtime stories behind closed doors. Nothing loud, nothing sharp, just life returning in small pieces. On Friday morning, Talbot called. "The state attorney wants a word," he said. "Not about your case, something broader." We met him outside the municipal building, where the air still held a trace of summer, even though the leaves had started turning. Inside, a woman named Karen Bennett greeted us. She had silver hair and a voice like she'd been reading court transcripts her whole life. "We've been following your story," she said. "And frankly, we're seeing a rise in similar filings. Elder coercion, asset manipulation, housing pressure. What you experienced, it's not rare. It's just rarely spoken aloud." She told me they were drafting a community education initiative, something that could be piloted at local libraries and churches. They wanted to include my story, anonymized if necessary, as part of the training materials. I glanced at Talbot. He gave a slow nod. "All right," I said, "if it'll help someone else." We walked out into the bright afternoon. Leaves scraped across the sidewalk. A woman pushing a stroller passed by and gave a quick, respectful smile. The kind people give when they recognize your name from somewhere, but aren't quite sure where. By the following week, the local council had approved a grant for the clinic. Not just for building repairs this time, but for legal advocacy services, an idea Talbot had quietly suggested months ago. Zoe printed out the press release for me. "You're in the third paragraph," she said, eyes skimming. "They called you a catalyst." Adam came by once unannounced. I was in the yard trimming back the azaleas. He stood by the fence with his hands in his pockets, looking down at his shoes. "You really did it," he said. "Went public. I didn't speak." He shifted, glanced at the porch. Zoe doesn't answer my calls. Lauren won't speak to me. The shears clicked in my hand. I looked at him. "I don't expect forgiveness," he added. I let the silence sit between us. After a while, he nodded once and turned to leave. That Sunday, Lauren brought home groceries. Jessie helped carry the milk and apples, dragging the bag across the floor with exaggerated grunts. Zoe unpacked cereal boxes and slid them into the pantry. It felt like an ordinary day. Over dinner, Lauren set down her fork. "I've been thinking," she said, "about the house, about what happens next." I waited. "I can't stay here forever," she said, "but I also don't want to go back to pretending nothing happened." She told me she'd spoken to a counselor, that she and Zoe were going together next week, that Jessie would start pre-K in the winter, that she was applying for a part-time job at the Historical Society downtown, cataloging records, updating archives. "It's not much," she said. "But it's something. It's more than something," I told her. Later that night, I pulled out Joe's old file box from the coat closet. Inside were insurance papers, tax documents, and at the bottom, an envelope with Zoe's name on it, written in Joe's handwriting. I hadn't seen it before. The letter was short, just a few lines about how proud he was of her, how he believed she'd do great things even if he wasn't around to see them. I set it aside on the kitchen counter. In the morning, she came downstairs early. I handed it to her without a word. She read it by the window, her shoulders still. When she was done, she folded the paper carefully and pressed it to her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. That afternoon, we took a walk through the neighborhood. Leaves crunched beneath our shoes. The houses looked the same, but something had shifted in how I saw them, in how I heard the wind move between them. Near the corner, someone had placed a small wooden bench beneath a maple tree. There was a brass plaque on it that read, "To those who keep telling the truth, even when no one wants to hear it." I sat for a moment. Zoe climbed up beside me. Zoe's letter stayed on the mantel through winter. Some days I'd catch her glancing at it before heading to school. She never said much about it, but every once in a while, I'd find her notebook open on the dining table, pages filled with little drawings, snippets of stories, a whole world building inside her. Jessie learned how to zip his jacket all by himself. Lauren started wearing her hair down again. She'd come home from work with ink on her fingers and museum brochures in her bag. We started baking on Saturdays, just simple things: banana bread, cinnamon rolls, coffee cake. The kitchen filled with the kind of warmth I hadn't felt in years. One evening, Lauren brought out a dusty old puzzle Joe and I had never finished. The last time we tried it was missing a corner piece, but now somehow every edge fit. Zoe found the final one beneath the radiator, slipped it into place like it had been waiting for her all along. Talbot still stopped by the clinic from time to time. He brought forms to sign updates from the grant committee, and once a laminated copy of the state's new elder housing protection policy. He said they were calling it Edith's Clause. I didn't say much, just nodded and thanked him. But later that night, when the house was quiet, I took it out of my drawer and read it twice. Spring came early that year. Crocuses pushed through the frost, and a robin built a nest above the porch light. One morning, Zoe asked if she could walk Jessie to school. She took his hand, checked the sidewalk, and glanced back at me with this look, steady, calm, grown-up, in a way I hadn't expected yet. I stood by the window and watched them disappear down the block. There was no parade, no grand announcement, No big gesture to mark the end of everything that had happened. Just steady days, honest days. That's what healing looks like sometimes. It's not loud, it's not swift. It's 100 small choices showing up, staying kind, holding your ground without shouting. People still ask how I managed to forgive. The truth is, I didn't not in the way folks imagine. I didn't forget. I didn't excuse. I just stopped giving my peace away. I kept what was mine. And somehow, in doing that, I gave space for the girls to find their own way back too. If you've ever been made to feel like you were standing alone in your own home, if someone tried to rewrite your story while you were still living it, I want you to know it's never too late to take it back. You don't have to make noise to be heard. You don't have to fight to be seen. Sometimes, the quietest truth is the one that echoes the longest. Thanks for staying with me through this. If you've got a story of your own, I'd love to hear it. And if this reminded you of someone who might need to hear it, go ahead and pass it along. I'll be right here.